So this is the closing session. And the purpose of this session is to review the schedule of proposed changes and to consider how these are to be dealt with. And furthermore, it is also to give some indication of the next steps in the process and to deal with any procedural questions you may have. None of this should be taken as prejudging the contents of the final report, which will take into account all relevant matters and representations. So turning firstly to the proposed changes to the South London Waste Plan. So some were suggested in response to our initial questions, and some were proposed in response to the publication of our matters, issues and questions. And several have been proposed during the course of the hearing sessions. So to assist the next stage of the examination, it'll be necessary to produce a consolidated list of main modifications. It incorporated all of the changes suggested since the Regulation 19 stage for the purposes of consultation and possibly further sustainability appraisal and habitats regulation assessment. So we touched on it before, but there's a distinction between main and additional modifications as referred to in the 2004 Act. So additional modifications are those that taken together do not materially affect the policies of the plan. Main modifications can therefore take it to be those that do materially affect its policies. They will therefore comprise any changes to the policies themselves or to the supporting text which have a significant bearing on the interpretation of policy. So part of the production of the consolidated list of changes will be the assessment of which of them are main and which of them are additional modifications. And this exercise should be carried out by the boroughs in conjunction with us, following the closure of the hearings and prior to the consultation process. In these regards, we note that the boroughs have produced separate schedules of what they consider to be main and additional modifications. So with this in mind, firstly, can we refresh on the modifications that have come forward in discussions this afternoon, please?
Thank you. The first modification is around looking at the monitoring framework to consider the environmental impacts of the plan. There was a round of discussion around the Weir Road waste sites, and that was quite a long discussion, but the overall modification was making sure that that we're meeting our environmental obligations and that the environmental impact of waste management is acceptable. The next modification was around the use of the words amenity in policy WP5. Next modification, 3, was around considering whether it's clear or not that any waste management or transfer planning applications will have to accord with the design policies of each local planning authority. The 5th modification is around policy, the statements of community involvement and making it clear how local communities can be involved and adding that within the plan. Currently, that's within the statements. The next modification is considering the words of the glossary, particularly against Mr. Furness's proposals for extant sites, existing sites, etc. The next modification is whether or not the existing modification about the Wandle Valley Regional Park is actually a main modification And associated with that is considering the physical aspects of the Wandle Trail as well as the users. And that's all the modifications I have.
Yeah, that accords with Mr. West. Did you want to say something?
Maybe I didn't follow it sufficiently closely, but this business of the review, where is that in this?
Yeah, that was the modification relating to the monitoring.
I think
that is included, will be included in that.
yeah, I think that we'll obviously just preface the broad headings there, but I think there's an expectation that those monitoring indicators that we've talked about will have an action, an intervention, and the intervention is whatever it comes out, which could include review. So we've covered it. We've perhaps not said the right words, but I think what you're seeking has been satisfied by what they suggested the modification. The key is what are the interventions that will then trigger something else. So, but you will have sight of that verbatim and be asked for comments, Mr. West.
I'm happy. Thank you.
So we discussed earlier about the involvement of the GLA in the production of the modifications table. And in post hearings correspondence, we'll liaise with you further to determine when the appropriate time might be to do that. The other thing we were wondering about was in terms of bringing forward a consolidated list of main modifications for consultation. To what extent would that have to be signed off by committee, or is it delegated approval for those changes?
I think the boroughs have different arrangements in place, so we've got delegated authority. Could you remind me of?
We've got delegated authority in our recommendation for portfolio holder sign off for main modifications in Croydon.
Merton has to delegate authority.
Yes, Kingston also has delegated authority.
Okay, thank you. So the plan includes changes that would have to be reflected on the policies maps of the constituent boroughs to capture the spatial implications of its policies. So have you any views on how this could be achieved and whether consultation on policies map changes can carry on in tandem with the consultation on the main modifications?
The changes to the policy map would obviously be the safeguarded sites. I don't think that's not going to take too long to prepare. So there's no reason that couldn't be ready at the same time, unless any of my colleagues want to tell me that that's unachievable. But I don't think it's going to take very long. We all have those GIS capabilities, so I think that's reasonable.
Okay, so in addition to the potential changes that have already been identified, following the closure of the hearings, we'll be reflecting on whether any other elements of the plan are potentially unsound or not legally compliant, and whether any revisions will be necessary to ensure soundness and or legal compliance. So for our part, we intend to produce a post-hearings letter outlining our reflections on the examination thus far and the discussions that have taken place at the hearing sessions. So the letter is intended to be helpful and to give the boroughs an opportunity to consider what further modifications, if any, should be made, or whether any further work may be required. So we intend to deal with this as a first stage of the post-hearing process, and our initial views should be with you in due course, but hopefully by the end of September. So our letter will be publicly available and published on the website in the usual way. We'll then work with you to finalise the schedule of proposed main modifications, which we'll need to see before it is published to ensure that it reflects our understanding of hearing discussions and is in the interest of the soundness and legal compliance of the plan. So others may have different opinions about the proposed changes, but that is a matter for Inspector Normington and I to resolve in due course through our report. And in any event, the changes will be subject to further consultation, so people will be able to voice their opinions on it. Additional modifications are not subject of consultation, and as appointed inspectors, we don't have the power to recommend additional modifications. However, if the boroughs wish to include them for completeness, then the distinction with main modifications should be clearly spelled out, and they should be contained in a separate schedule. The period of consultation on the main modifications and related material should be for a minimum of 7 weeks, which is in line with the period that the Regulation 19 version of the plan was consulted on. In carrying out further consultation, you should make it clear that comments should solely be addressed to the proposed changes and the implications arising from them. And we've touched on the possible need for further sustainability appraisal and any necessary assessment under the habitats regs of the implications of those changes. And the borough should keep us informed of progress, particularly the date of the closure of the consultation period. So once consultation on the main modifications is concluded, we will welcome a statement from the boroughs which responds to the main issues raised in the consultation. And we'll take that statement into account in framing our report alongside the consultation responses. So in taking that, we'll obviously take all that material into account before finalising our report. At the moment, it is difficult to give definitive guidance about when the report will be produced. So obviously, we don't know how long the main modifications consultation is going to take, but an initial estimate will be early 2022. A firmer date will be given nearer the time, particularly once we have a date for the closure of the consultation. Do you have any procedural questions at this point regarding the post-hearing stage?
No, I think that's all very clear, sir.
I think we also have a hand up from Mr. Potter, who perhaps wants to speak on this matter as well. So your hands up, Mr. Potter. I assume you're still there and you want to speak.
Yes, I do, sir. Sorry, there's a bit of background noise here. When the boroughs were going through the modifications that they got down, I didn't catch whether they actually included the deletion of site S1 from the appendix as a safeguarded site. Did I actually miss that, or?
If I heard the boroughs rightly, and Inspector Fort's response there, it was only the modifications that cropped up in that last session. Oh, so I took it as read that Mr. James's response to the deletion of that we made at the start of that session was the modification for the session prior to lunchtime. So unless I'll ask Mr. James just to confirm that is a position, but I don't think we were seeking for confirmation of that in those modifications, Mr. Potter, which related to that last session. But the previous sessions modifications were discussed at the start, and that's probably the distinction. But I've just asked Mr. James to confirm that there is no lack of clarity.
No, I can confirm that. We've got deletion of S1 on the list, and I confirm we won't forget, Mr. Potter.
Thank you for that reassurance, and sorry if I misunderstood. Can I also just make a request that it would be helpful if, when publishing the modifications, that a version of the plan itself be produced with all of those modifications dropped in, so we can see it all in one place. Please.
Yes, in fact, my colleague Eben had already done that actually last week in preparation for today. So we can publish that at the same time as the consultations. I think respondents will find that probably quite useful.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you to you both inspectors for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. So before we close the hearing sessions, we'd like to invite the boroughs to make any closing remarks that they may have.
Thank you, sir. I haven't got any further remarks, obviously, on the content of what's been discussed. I think we've obviously done that at length now, and we understand where we are. I'll just, I suppose, a quick thanks to everyone that's been involved. Thank you to yourselves for the clarity of the hearings. We've got a clear steer on where we go next. Obviously, a big thank you to Carmel again for all the work she's done on the examination so far, and with more to come as well. Thanks to my colleagues too for everything that they've done on the examination so far, and all the work that has put in to producing the plan. I didn't really have anything further to add, sir.
I think just before Mr. Fort closes, Inspector Fort closes formally, just I want to express my thanks as well on behalf of us to not just yourselves, but the proactive way which people have engaged. It's not been confrontational, it's been positive engagement throughout. It's been matters of real concern and matters where there has been genuinely attempt to address those concerns from both sides. So thank you for your engagement and the way you've done that in a very positive, helpful, not non-confrontational manner, but equally engaged. But thank you for, because you've done the same as well. And I know we've pushed you, and I know we've pushed you on purpose to have a think. And when we've thought you've not had a think, we've pushed you a bit more. But it's meant in the best spirit, and we've done that sometimes jovially. And I know I've often looked at Eben and thought, I'm going to come back at Eben on that one. But it's not done with any malice whatsoever. It's done with the best sense of engagement, and you responded to that very well. Sometimes it's not always the case. In this case, it has been the case, and that goes to the whole of your team. So I want to thank you on behalf of us, and Inspector Fort will do that formally. But that's my last contribution as far as the hearing session goes. Thank you for the way that you've engaged as well. Thank you to Carmel as well. We will do that again, and we'll do that informally too. But thank you for the way that you've responded and the way you've risen to the challenges that we've thrown at you. And we have thrown a few at you, and you've dealt with that as well very well. So thank you.
Yes, I'd like to echo Inspector Normington's comments there. Thanks for the very proactive and positive engagement that we've had and contributions from all parties. I'd like to thank the boroughs for the timely responses to our various requests and for accommodating these sessions. Of course, we'd like to thank Carmel for her efficient and effective work during the hearings and in the wider examination. So, having said that, we've got nothing further to discuss today, and the hearing sessions are now closed. Thank you.